You know, in Bible study a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Philistines. And we looked up on a map of, it showed the area around Israel during Jesus' time and during Moses' time and before. And it's interesting to know that the area of land that the Philistines occupied back then was something we call the Gaza Strip today. It's that same block of land. You know, so we've been doing battle with the Philistines even back then, and the legacy lives on today with what's going on in the Gaza Strip. But that's not what I want to talk about today. Today I want to talk about the significance of November the 11th, the day we call Armistice Day. We celebrated on Sunday, the day after. Many people wonder why November the 11th was chosen for Veterans Day, but it's first important to know that this day used to be referred to as Armistice Day. And that little bit of history is where I want to begin. On November the 11th, 1921, an unknown American soldier was killed in World War I and buried in Arlington National Cemetery in Arlington, Virginia. These 639 acres, right below what used to be General Lee's house, offers a view of Washington, D.C. and the beautiful Potomac River, and it's the resting place for countless numbers of our dead. Approximately 400,000 U.S. military people lie there in peace today. That date, November the 11th of 1921, was also when the unknown soldiers were interned at highest national places of honor in both England and France. In England, it was Westminster Abbey. And in France, it was Arc de Triomphe. And those two places still house tombs of the unknown that have died. Because these memorials occurred on November the 11th, and because at 11 a.m. on November the 11th, 1918, was the official end of World War I, the day was declared to be Armistice Day by Congress in 1926. 12 years later, in 1938, it became a national holiday in the United States. But why was it originally called Armistice Day, you may ask? Well, you got to think about what armistice means. It means cease fighting. And it was the hope and the belief of a lot of people back in that time that World War I was the war to end all wars, and fighting would forever cease on a world scale. As you know, that didn't turn out to be true. And just a few years after Armistice Day was declared a national holiday, another war broke out in Europe, World War II, in which 403,000 Americans died. According to the United States Department of Veteran Affairs, the first celebration to use the term Veterans Day occurred in Birmingham, Alabama. A World War II veteran named Raymond Weeks organized a parade and other festivals to honor the veterans in that area. And he called it National Veterans Day, and it was held on November the 11th, 1947. And later, on June the 1st, 1954, legislation was signed by President Eisenhower that made November the 11th officially Veterans Day. Every year on Veterans Day, a combined color guard from all branches of the service lay a presidential wreath on the tomb of the unknown at Arlington Cemetery, and taps is played. That happened again just yesterday. If you watched the news, you saw President Biden up there following along in the footsteps of those presidents before him. Arlington National Cemetery, just visiting it and seeing the tomb of the unknown is an experience that makes one very appreciative of all those who have served this country. Dean and I have been blessed to have visited many times when taking grandkids to Washington, D.C. It's always one of the most important stops on our tour when we're showing them around the nation's capital. We like to show them around the nation's capital so that maybe they'll feel like as they grow up, they got some skin in the game, and that capital belongs to them as much as anybody else. You know, sometimes when exercising our rights and our freedoms that we sometimes take for granted, we forget the price that the men and women who serve in uniform sacrifice to give us those freedoms. And those same men and women in uniform sacrifice to maintain them for us. And sometimes they pay dearly for that service. There is a statement that I want to share with you today that I came across this last week, and I sadly don't know who first wrote it. The article that I read it from didn't have an author to it, but I think it accurately reflects the impacts veterans have had on our lives today. As I read it, please extend it to also include our law enforcement and our first responders and the impacts they've had on our lives. That statement reads as follows: "It is the veteran, not the preacher, who has given us freedom of religion. It is the veteran, not the reporter, who has given us freedom of press. It is the veteran, not the poet, who has given us freedom of speech. It is the veteran, not the community organizer, who has given us freedom to assemble. It is the veteran, not the lawyer, who has given us the right to a fair trial. It is the veteran, not the politician, who has given us the right to vote. It is the veteran who salutes the flag. It is the veteran who serves under the flag. And it is the veteran who deserves to be buried under that same flag." Today is Veterans Day Sunday, and may God bless our veterans. Today is a day that often goes unnoticed in the church, but I think it is important for us to take the time to remember and appreciate the men and the women who have served our country and who still serve it today. As I read the scriptures today from 2 Samuel, we find a passage that speaks about honoring warriors who fight in battle. It is in this passage that we read about David's mighty men who were valiant warriors in his army. These men displayed great courage and often fought against insurmountable odds, as do our soldiers today. They were not just passive heroes with great faith. They actively engaged in battle and achieved victory through faith and through strength. As we reflect on this passage, we can draw several lessons from it. First and foremost, we must remember the price of freedom. Our veterans fought and often sacrificed their very lives to obtain and preserve our freedom. Just to give you a glimpse, 25,000 people died in the Revolutionary War. 20,000 soldiers died in the War of 1812. 13,000 died in the Mexican-American War in 1846. 620,000 died in the Civil War. It started in 1861. And over 2,000 died in the Spanish-American War in 1898. I remember my grandfather talking about his father who served in that war. And then along comes the World Wars. World War I, where 116,000 died. And then World War II, where 403,000 died. And then in my lifetime, the Korean War, where 35,000 died. And then the Vietnam War, where 58,000 died. And the wars go on today with the War in Terror, where over 7,000 people have died. Soldiers in uniform and first responders and law enforcement. Doing the math, that's over 1.3 million lives lost for the freedom we each enjoy and take sometimes for granted today. And that number does not even come close to include the millions that were maimed or wounded while serving our country. Nor does it count the sacrifices made by our law enforcement and first responders who died while serving others. Freedom is absolutely never free, and we should always be grateful for the sacrifices that were made, especially by our veterans on Veterans Day. Our freedom is not permanent. It absolutely must be constantly guarded, defended, and protected 24/7. You know, what I view as our last great president, Ronald Reagan, he was the 40th president. He said this in his January 5th inaugural address as governor of California in 1967. He said this: "Perhaps you and I have lived too long with this miracle called freedom to properly appreciate it. Freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. It's not ours by way of inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation. For it comes only once to a people, and those in world history who have known freedom and then lost it have never known it again." The cost of freedom to free people for protecting that freedom has always been paid for in both blood and treasure. Perhaps we need to pause and think about that this morning. Second, we should honor those who fought for our freedom. When we see a veteran, we should take the time to thank them for their service. It's a small gesture, but it means a lot to those who have served. We should also consider other ways to show honor and appreciation to those serving. Small gestures do mean a lot, especially during this time of year, this holiday time of year, when many of them are far away from home. Small gestures such as sending a care package or writing a letter to servicemen and women overseas. Small gestures can mean a lot to our soldier patriots. These small gestures, when they receive something from the people back in the States, people that they've pledged to serve and protect with their very lives, it means a lot. Hear for a minute the oath each service person takes before putting on the uniform to serve this country. That oath says, and each one of them says it: "I," and in their name, "do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to the regulations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, so help me God." That's a big oath to put on, but they do it. They take this oath very seriously. And Ronald Reagan, who I'm going to show you a clip from one of his most famous speeches, talked about most eloquently. Neil, could you run that clip?
If we look to the answer as to why for so many years we achieved so much, prospered as no other people on earth, it was because here in this land we unleashed the energy and individual genius of man to a greater extent than has ever been done before. Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth. The price for this freedom at times has been high, but we have never been unwilling to pay that price. Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look. The sloping hills of Arlington National Cemetery, with its row upon row of simple white markers bearing crosses or stars of David, they add up to only a tiny fraction of the price that has been paid for our freedom. Each one of those markers is a monument to the kind of hero I spoke of earlier. Their lives ended in places called Belleau Wood, the Argonne, Omaha Beach, Salerno, and halfway around the world on Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Pork Chop Hill, the Chosin Reservoir, and in 100 rice paddies and jungles of a place called Vietnam. Under one such marker lies a young man, Martin Treptow, who left his job in a small-town barber shop in 1917 to go to France with the famed Rainbow Division. There on the Western Front, he was killed trying to carry a message between battalions under heavy artillery fire. We're told that on his body was found a diary. On the flyleaf, under the heading, My Pledge, he had written these words: America must win this war. Therefore I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure. I will fight cheerfully and do my utmost as if the issue of the whole struggle depended on me alone. We must realize that no arsenal or no weapon in the arsenals of the world is so formidable as the will and moral courage of free men and women. It is a weapon our adversaries in today's world do not have. It is a weapon that we as Americans do have. Let that be understood by those who practice terrorism and prey upon their neighbors. As for the enemies of freedom, those who are potential adversaries, they will be reminded that peace is the highest aspiration of the American people. We will negotiate for it, sacrifice for it. We will not surrender for it now or ever. We are Americans.
Some pretty powerful words. We are Americans. And we are a free people only because of the sacrifices made by our men and women in uniform serving the cause of justice in this country and around the world. Remember, I read from John this morning. It said, greater love hath no man than that a man lay down his life for his friends. That's what these people do. They lay down their lives. Third, we can learn from the example of these veterans. They took a stand and stood their ground regardless of the opposition or the allies that were on our side. They stood their ground. They fought with unwavering determination and served their country and its people faithfully. We should strive to emulate their courage and commitment in our lives as we leave this place of worship today. When you leave the sanctuary today, notice the pictures of some members of our congregation, past and present, on the wall that have served our country. Their pictures will be on your right as you leave. If your picture, a picture of one of your family members happens to be on that wall, I want to say personally, thank you. And lastly, we can pray those today who stand in harm's way. Sadly, as we speak, we are teetering, seems like, on war once again. A war to defend the rights of free people just like us, whose rights to live as free people are being again challenged and threatened. Look at Ukraine. Look at Israel. And look at what could happen in Taiwan. All these are potential hot spots on the brink of boiling over and getting out of control, where our country and its young men and women will again be drawn in to play a part in it. Prayer is a powerful tool, and we should lift up our soldiers in prayer, asking God to protect them and grant them victory should they again be put in harm's way. You know, it gets personal to me. I have two grandsons who are currently old enough to serve, 21 and 25. And I have a couple of granddaughters who are old enough to serve should the need arise, ages 22 and 20. And then I have a young man who is on the brink at 17 of being called to serve. And behind them, I have more grandchildren, grandsons, and granddaughters that I worry about for the next few years. Should bad things happen in our country and in our world, pray for those who serve. 1 Thessalonians 5:17 says, pray without ceasing. We can and we should all pray for God's intervention and deliverance of both soldier and country, both today and in times ahead, should war once again be put upon us, and those that we love put in harm's way, and freedom's cost in blood and treasure, again, must be sadly paid. Remember Ronald Reagan's words from 50 years ago. I read them earlier. Freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. It is not ours by way of inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation. For it comes only once to a people, and those in world history who have known freedom and lost it have never known it again. What an ominous thing. May God bless our veterans, and may God continue to bless the United States of America. Please bow your heads with me. Almighty and everlasting God, we lift up to you today our faithful patriots and our military men and women who have served our country, protecting our nation and our freedoms. Some still with us today, and some who are but treasured memories, passed away perhaps, but very still much in our thoughts and prayers. We also lift up to you all military men and women of the United States of America presently serving, and ask for your divine protection upon every one of them. Thank you, Lord, for their service and for their sacrifices while serving. While some gave much, help us never forget that others gave all. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.